and I come back to the point, military actions, which happen to be illegal, which only make matters worse, as we've seen so dramatically for the last 6 weeks almost, in the course of killing people, which fail to protect a single Kosovar from being oppressed or killed, as the military and NATO has actually rather candidly admitted. Those cannot draw any support or justification from the crimes of the other side or of anybody else, since they're not lessening those signs. In other words, the age-old romanticism about militarism, about military methods, about armed violence as a necessary and valuable thing, has been once again, as so many times in the past, been drawn on and abused simply to create, to worsen a humanitarian disaster. Thus, on the one hand, I would say that those people who would instead turn to international authority, structure of law, and a structure of constitutional law that would restrain violence by states, whatever their pretense or their rationale is to be taken as a global need and an objective in the future. That's the way we should move, rather than to put our trust in the good judgment and benevolence of the mighty and well-armed.
Dan, you were deeply involved in the strategy of the Vietnam War at one time. You worked with the Pentagon and I believe with the Rand Corporation, and then you came to an enlightenment or an awakening. You released the now famous Pentagon Papers, which I totally believe helped to save countless lives in that conflict in Vietnam, a conflict in which over 58,000 American servicemen and lost their lives. And let us not forget that there was 3 million Vietnamese that paid the supreme price there and also lost their lives. Do you see a parallel or a deja vu between now the U.S. NATO bombings in the Balkan and the Vietnam era?
Well, I think I started by saying that I have the feeling actually that I'm reliving that period, not that just that there's an analogy, but it's like a flashback or a simple reliving of that. We were then facing bombing in the spring of 1965, 34 years ago, that looked as hopeless as the bombing in Serbia does at achieving the current U.S. objectives. We had an unwillingness then, which lasted 10 years, on the part of our president to modify his objectives and drastically downwards, and to make great concessions in negotiation in order to end the conflict. That didn't change in the 10 years of large-scale war in that case. It may be changing now, and I hope that that's a big difference. I hope that President Clinton is in the process of modifying his currently stated objectives in the direction of objectives such as a non-NATO force in the northern parts of Serbia, of Kosovo, which could be accepted by the Serbs without further fighting. But third, without changing the objectives, and indeed the U.S. has not, as of the time we speak here, modified its very ambitious objective. The U.S. then was facing, as it is now, the prospect of doubling the stakes and sending ground troops and increasing our commitment to the fight, which of course is always accompanied by an increase in the bombing that goes with those ground troops. Ground troops are not a substitute for bombing. They are an accompaniment to greatly increased bombing, always. So if you don't like the bombing now, as I don't, and the destruction it's causing, ground invasion would cause far, far more, along with the bombing. So at that time we made the wrong choice, and I'm hoping desperately that will not happen again. at that time, if I had revealed, I believe, in 1964 or 1965, what I knew of actual planning and actual estimates, which held out really no hope of achieving our objectives short of an extremely large war, these estimates being very different from what the President was telling the public he was planning to do, or what the prospects of our actions might be, I believe I could have prevented the war, and that's a very heavy responsibility to bear. It was not something I thought of doing at that time. There was no real precedent for it, and it was, as a loyal bureaucrat at that time, government official, it didn't seem to me, it didn't occur to me to do that. But after several years of hopeless and terribly bloody war, I did come to see that my loyalties were to the Constitution, to the Congress, to the public, to the humans in this conflict on both sides, including the Vietnamese, overriding really my loyalty to a particular boss or a particular party or a particular president. And that, to say the least, I had to act on these other loyalties. So I did tell the truth, and with documents, giving them to Congress and then eventually to the public. And that did play some role eventually in helping shorten the war. I would hope that people in governments in general now, not only the U.S., but definitely including the U.S., who are aware that the public is being misled as to the prospects of achieving our current objectives, who are aware of plans for escalation of the war that have not been revealed to Congress or parliaments in other countries, who are aware of various deceptions or illegalities that are going on, as I certainly was at the time. I hope that such people will not wait as long as I did until, let us say, the troops have been committed, until the bombs now are falling, but until various escalations have occurred, before they consider doing what I finally did, which was to tell what they know to their respective legislatures and to the public at whatever cost to their own careers, even if they expected to go to prison for doing that. We're talking in many cases about people who are or have been in the military and have often contemplated losing their own lives or having their bodies destroyed by doing what they thought was right for their country. They should consider that as civilians or as officials, they should of course be willing, I'd say, to go to prison if necessary, or certainly to give up their careers, which is a more likely consequence, by telling the truth in the interests of their country and of humanity. And I know many of them, if they consider that, would find it easily possible to do that, and it would be very rewarded by the saving of lives, the shortening of a war. So we do need globally really a new sense of the meaning of patriotism and of loyalty, which takes much more account of loyalty to constitutional order, to the UN Charter, and to the needs of humanity at large, then rather than exclusive focus on the interests or the demands of a particular chain of command. That's especially true in the democracies, and it's a great virtue of democracy that people are called on to act in this broader sense of loyalty. Unfortunately, if democracy, as it really is, really existing democracy, doesn't usually encourage people to think about these broader challenges, these broader loyalties, and doesn't really focus on the way the difference it means to be a good American or a good Briton or a good citizen of a democracy, instead of being a good Stalinist, let us say, or as we said in World War II, a good German in the Germany of the 30s and 40s. So I do think that there are people right now who were giving the president advice that was on the basis of judgments that were quite counter to the judgments the president was expressing to the public, and they should consider right now sharing their own judgment and their own knowledge with the public.
Dan, you speak of the word truth, and it's been said that truth is the first casualty of war. Just in the past couple of years, former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense during a period of the Vietnam War, came out with a book, and he states in that book that they knew at a high level back, I believe it was 1967, 68, that the way they were proceeding with the war there was unwinnable and unattainable, and yet they continued the war until 1975. Let us hope that that doesn't happen now, that perhaps William Cohen and others will think through the process of what we're involved with here. I would like to say also, I heard the use of the word patriotism, and we know that peace is very patriotic. I would like to ask you to go back to the moment when you came to the realization that you were going to release the Pentagon Papers. Can you share with us what that was? Or?
No, I can't.
Okay.
I'm collapsing.
I understand that.
Don't worry.
Okay. Well, again, it's been a pleasure here speaking with Daniel Ellsberg, and I would like to say from Washington, D.C. here a comment on what President William Jefferson Clinton told the American public when he was campaigning for the recent re-election. He promised the American people that he was going to build a new bridge into the 21st century, into the new millennium. Well, indeed, if this is a new bridge that he's building, the bridges that are being bombed in Belgrade, the human lives, the civilian lives that have been lost upon those bridges, I personally deplore it, refuse to cross that bridge by motor vehicle, train, walking, bicycle, or skateboard. I would rather swim, I would rather wade across any raging waters that might be beneath that bridge. So in light of that, I think I'll close with a comment here made by United States General Omar Bradley after World War II. This is a direct quote of the general. Wars can be prevented just as surely as they can be provoked, and we who fail to prevent them must share in the guilt for the dead. I thank Daniel Ellsberg today for speaking out. I think he is one that is speaking out to prevent war. I know he is, because he's done it in the past. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.